If I say your name wrong, HR Director at Garmin to lead our session about ideal employee. Welcome, Kelly.
Thank you, Mayra. So I hinted earlier that I'm a little bit less technically inclined than the others. So this is the first time I'm presenting. I use Zoom quite a bit as a participant, but not as a presenter. So I am going to just work on sharing my screen. So bear with me a moment while we just get this together. All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes, great.
Excellent. Okay, so now I need to see my notes page. So Mayra, I know exactly why you need to use multiple computers now. I know multiple screens. I have 2 screens. I need my notes page, but I also want to be able to view stuff. So I think I've got it here.
No worries.
So I guess everybody they're on mute, but I can see some of your faces. All right, just gonna move my screen a little bit more. All right, I think I've got it. All right, good to go. So welcome and thank you for signing up for the session. I felt like I was actually putting together almost like a job ad or a job application when JP asked me to provide, a summary of what this was going to be. So I took it very seriously and was thinking, oh my goodness, okay, so I'm actually going to put a lot of the things that I do on a routine basis that I do all the time. I've got to extrapolate that out of my head and use quite a bit of resources to be able to put something together for you. So I'll get started, talk about some learning outcomes. So I'm just going to ask a newbie question again. I want to make sure you can see my second screen. Yep, okay, so you can. So I think I got this going now. So I'm an HR director. I'll talk a little bit more about myself in a moment, but I'm used to one thing after another, rules, black or white, there's no gray area in HR. And so I kind of come at this from a professional perspective in that I've got some learning outcomes for you. And I suspect this is why you signed up for the session. You wanted to learn a little bit about resume creation. So the best practices for resume creation, when to use a cover letter, how to prepare for an interview, and the ideal skill set that
from the everyday life. It's just hard for us, at times because
okay, Nagar, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, yes. Thank you. Sorry. So during this session, I'm gonna ask for you guys to be on mute, but there are gonna be times where I have some polls and I also have chat. And so we can absolutely, our team is going to be monitoring the chat throughout. I am as well, because I am gonna ask you some questions in a moment. And then there's gonna be quite a bit of time at the end for specific questions relating to the presentation. So my last comment was that I am going to talk about ideal skill sets that employers are looking for right now. I have mine in my mind when I do recruiting for roles at gar.me. However, I wanted to make sure that they are in line and of course our best practice for you when you go out to look for a role and how to highlight and what to highlight specifically. So just so you can validate or know who I am, there we go again. There we go, introductions. So a little bit about me. I've been an HR professional for over 11 years. I call myself a lifelong student. I have a BA in sociology, a certificate in healthcare, 2 post-grad certifications. One is in IT, believe it or not, and electronic commerce specifically. So it's not techie IT, but electronic commerce, which is probably history by now. and one in HR, which makes me relevant to today's presentation. I have worked in 5 different corporations, 3 medium businesses, 1 small business, sorry, and I have my own personal business. There was a time between 2 jobs that I actually was looking for a role. It took me 9 months to find the role, and so I started up my own business. I was doing marketing, electronic marketing, and so that is what came out of one of those post-grad certificates. In my career to date, I have had 18 different roles. I would say the majority of being in HR now, but you know, had many, I'd say, careers until I really felt comfortable in HR. My family picture is there. You can see me live. I realize that 1 husband. And so for those who were in my session last year, and I'm not quite sure, I'm going to ask in a minute, I said in Canada we're only allowed 1 husband, and I got, you know, a roaring laugh out of the group. And this is so hard. So maybe it's funny, maybe it's not, to you guys. So I have 2 kids as well, 12-and-a-half girl and 8-and-a-half-year-old boy. And I have to say that I cannot wait for school to be finished next week. It has been very difficult to work from home, to be a teacher, to be a mother, wife. And so I can't wait for that to be over, and we'll have some peace in the house. I also have over 15 fish. So we have a fish tank. It's a 29-gallon, sort of my hobby, and it also keeps me calm. And in that fish tank, I have about 10 or more shrimp. And so in that little picture there, there's a couple pictures of the types of fish I have, and that little red thing in there, I don't know how well you can see it, is called a cherry shrimp. So I think they're cute. I also eat fish, but I still think, you know, they're awesome. So that's a little bit about me. I do want to know a little bit about you. And so I have my first question, and I can't ask too much, unfortunately, because we only have a certain amount of time, but just for me to kind of gauge a little bit about you, I would like to know what year of study you're in. So I had made a point that I am going to initiate the poll. So bear with me a second as I start my first question. All right, I think you guys should be able to see the poll now. So I put what year of study, 1, 2, 3, 4, and sometimes you're in a 5-year program or more. Great. So still a couple more coming in. So it looks like the majority of you are in 2nd year, couple in 3rd, and some in 4th. Okay, great, fantastic. And I'm going to open up the chat for a second. And thank you. And let me find the chat now. And I wanted to ask you in the chat, you'll probably find it before I do, you can start answering. What area of study are you doing right now? Here we go. All right, so medical biotechnology, political science, MBA, finance, economics, great. Thanks, Steve. Business and public health. This is awesome. We've got a wide variety of majors and focuses that we've got in here. Interesting, a lot of folks last year in the Campus Ambassador program were in marketing. I see some business, so you might go into marketing. Awesome. Okay, thank you. And one final poll question, just to finish off getting to know you a little bit better, is I'm just curious if anybody is a 2nd or 3rd year Campus Ambassador. So I was curious to ask you if you attended my session last year. And so it's a yes or a no, and good to go. All right, so it looks like almost no one has. Fantastic. So you can't make fun of me from last year then. Good stuff. Okay, well, I think that's it. Super. I like how long that poll lasts. Okay, we'll get to polls a little bit later. Thank you, everybody, for your participation. We'll get right into it. You know, and I wanted to start off talking about resume writing and best practices. So at the beginning of a resume, usually, so if you can envision your resume, if you haven't done one yet, usually you have a header and then you followed by an objective or a summary. And it's important to note what to use. And so again, I'm talking best practices here. This is based on research. And so while this is what I have researched, it doesn't mean that this is what you have to do. This is really recommended. And so we can talk about it and you'll understand a little bit why you do decide to do one versus the other. So at the beginning, usually folks put an objective or a summary. And so I wanted to articulate a little bit about the difference. Usually objectives are focused on new grads. So the objective focuses on what position you're looking for, what environment you would prefer or industry, and what types of skills you're offering. Now, it's difficult to articulate the type of environment. And so especially, I would even say myself, I have an idea of the type of environment I'm looking for, but how do you articulate that in words? And so I would say focus more on the industry versus the environment or culture at that point, because you may not know one specific to that particular role. So as I go through this, I'm going to talk about a lot of customization to the role that you're applying for. And in that objective, as an example, if you are applying to a role, a healthcare role, for example, I saw biomedical technology, then you may have a specific position that you are applying for. So if you're responding to a job ad and it's a specific title, then that's the title you're looking for. That's the title you're seeking. And then some of the skills that you offer, those are skills, and we'll talk about skills a little bit later, but these are generally learned skills, both hard skills and soft skills, that will be able to market yourself. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes, okay? So that's part of the objective. The summary is usually a summary about yourself. And so what I mean within this resume is you're doing either or, you're not doing both. A summary is generally meant for folks who have several years of full-time professional experience. It essentially serves as a mini business card. It details your background, your strengths, and your marketable skills. So every time I mention skills, and I'll try not to repeat this again, is that we'll talk about the skills a little bit later. And then any relevant personality traits that are going to be part of that soft skill set that we'll mention. And so I wouldn't recommend you do both an objective and a summary. It's one or the other. The recommendation is objectives for new grads, maybe with a focus on education. And then you focus, if there is any relevant volunteer experiences or co-ops or even work experience, then that's relevant to put in there. And sometimes the job application is very detailed on what they want to see in a resume. And that makes it obviously a lot easier. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the best practice on the format. So okay. So there's what's called a reverse chronological which is your most recent work experience, comes first, and then it goes back from there, and therefore your oldest or last work experience is last. And I didn't notate it in this presentation. However, you could, if you wanted to make a note, and so these are for folks generally who have more than 10 years experience. You don't need to go back 10 years, further than 10 years. So whatever date it is, go back. Now, if you have 15 jobs in the last 10 years, I also recommend you don't do that either. And we can get more specific if you have questions during our question time. But generally it's you put your most recent work experience first, and then you work back that way. There's also a functional job, a functional resume, where you target specifically to that role, and you only put in experience or jobs that you've had focused only on that role. So recently, well, I'd like to say recently, probably now 6 months ago, we were hiring for the Office Grind. The Office Grind is a cafe that we have, so GuardMe owns that cafe at the bottom of our office building. And we were hiring for baristas. And specifically, I know that when we had interviews, I had some candidates that stated, well, I've done retail roles, and though because she was applying for a barista role, she only put in her resume barista pieces of experience. And so she specifically honed in on that particular role. And then the combination resume is really the best parts of the functional with chronological experience. For my personal preference, I like the combination. When I was applying for GuardMe, and so I think this is a great job, and so I'm going to use my experience in terms of my resume and my cover letter to be able to articulate as well. What I did was I had my summary, and then I highlighted those skills, and I looked at the particular skills in that job, the job posting, and I moved within my experience, depending on what GuardMe was asking, I moved around my bullet points to match exactly what GuardMe was looking for. So I look like the best candidate. So that's my personal preference. But really, it depends on what you have to build your resume with. And so not all of it is meant to be just functional as well. You need to be able to have a little bit of both. All right. Okay, so I have another poll. My next slide, I wanted to ask you, actually, so bear with me while I find the poll. There we go, it's hidden. So my next question is, according to best practices, well, okay, what cover letter is recommended for new grads? I wasn't finished my resume, so I've made a note in here. So let's answer the question, and then I'll talk to this in a second. According to best practice, what cover letter is recommended for new grads? So it looks like we've got a split going on, a little bit more so for the functional accommodation and combination. Okay, we've got a really good split here. Polling's ended. I want to see these results in a second, so I'm going to come back to it in a moment. Because as I looked at my next slide, so let's just flip to the next slide so I can talk to it here. I talked about cover letter in that poll, and I obviously placed my notes in the wrong slide, so I apologize for that. Because I did want to take you through more of the resume, so apologize for that again. We'll come back to it in a moment. So the best practice for a new grad for resume is generally the reverse chronological. So here we go. Here's a miswrite too. And that's because you may not have 5 or more years of full-time professional working experience. And so what I wanted to do, and while I recognize that not all of you are new grads, essentially, I see most of you are in second year, but this can also be applied to part-time roles, volunteer positions. If I'm not mistaken, you would have had to, I'm just going to look for a moment. You probably had to put together a resume in order to apply for the campus ambassador role. Someone going to nod for me who's live. Yep, thanks, Julie. I can see you nodding. Okay, good. Yeah, so in this case, it's best to do a reverse chronological. And so anything that, any history you would have that you could put in. So I'm going to talk about just what the resume will look like. So ideally, it's the header, including the name and contact details. What I find when I get a lot of applicants is that they actually also put in their street address and or their street address with their apartment number. And that's not, personally, I don't need to see that as a recruiter. Perhaps you can put city and the province, but if you guys are aware of privacy laws in Canada anyway, we don't need to see that as a recruiter yet. There is quite a bit of HR talent acquisition automated application programs where you must put that in, but then they also should have a privacy statement. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is you don't have to have your personal address on there. You can have your name, please, your resume, your email address and your phone number for contact. That's most important. And I can tell you, I have received resumes with people's names and no phone number, no email. And I have no way of contacting them. So a lot of that comes through Indeed. I use Indeed as a way to recruit. And so hopefully I can connect with them through Indeed because they have a pretty robust free talent management program. However, if it's not there and I can't get back to them, so double check. That's something that I shared when I eventually reached that person. So obviously, and one additional piece that a lot of people are now putting into resumes is their LinkedIn profile. And I know that you had a LinkedIn session yesterday, if you had attended, and if you didn't, there's a chance on the website to listen to it again. And so I think as long as you have a robust and well-prepared LinkedIn profile, then you can absolutely put that on your resume as well. And then your objective statement, and note, I put in here objective statement, assuming that if you're a newer grad, then that's ideally what you're looking for. And then your experience or qualifications. And, you know, in a resume, a lot of people, they either write experience or they write qualifications. Honestly, it's the same thing. Don't write both. It's one or the other. I have no preference. As long as there's a header, so I can just easily, my eyes can just go to each section. And then you're going to notate your education. And your education is also going to be in chronological order, not reverse chronological, but actually chronological order, so that, no, it's still reverse. I'm sorry. I think I got thrown off with my question, so now I'm backwards. Reverse chronological. I would like to see your most recent education first, and then any secondary education, and so your oldest would be. So for example, I have all of that education that I shared. My most recent would be my HR graduate certificate from Seneca. So that would be my most, and then my oldest would be my BA from U of T. And then relevant volunteer activities. So this Campus Ambassador program, this is an amazing volunteer opportunity that I think has to go on every resume. And I added the word relevant later on because there are some that may not be, depending on the role that you're applying for. And so just use your own discretion in that case. Okay, this is where I would normally say, do you have any questions yet? We'll get to that, so bear with me. So when we talk about, just go back for a second, the experience or qualifications, when you are building the content for your resume within each line of experience, you're going to want to focus on your results. And I know you're probably thinking, Kelly, I am still a student. What am I going to do here? And you can absolutely use projects that you have worked on, because one, you're in a team, and then there's also different projects. I'm just, been out of school for a long time, maybe labs that ended up being a project that you can articulate results for. So examples that are here are showing how you improved work process or workflow, how you've helped increase the quality or reduce the cost of something, how you have provided customer satisfaction, how you have increased sales or profits of that particular business that you were working for, or for your own business. Provide something of value to others. Contribute goals to the goals of the organization. Learned valuable skills which can be transferable. And I'll talk about transferable skills a little bit later. And then demonstrate that you were recognized for your contributions or achievements. When I was laid off at a time from one of the big corporation companies that I worked for, and luckily they provided what's called transition training or transition skills. And so I went to this company and they assisted us with building a resume together. And one of the best practices that is continued to be consistent, and we're now talking 12 years later, is that being able to articulate on your resume and demonstrating on your resume numbers. So using numbers, I talked about increased profit, so you could use percentage signs. Provided customer satisfaction, so perhaps you could say I've increased the satisfaction level of my own interactions by 10, 15, 20%. Contributed to the growth of the customer satisfaction score by 15%. Demonstrating or recognizing achievements or contributions. You can talk about any sales increases, or one sales club, or best employee for third, second, fourth quarter, any of those types of things. Those are deterrents, it takes away the eyes from words and actually focuses the reader right onto a number, and that can be very interesting for the reader. And so depending on the role that you're looking for, that is something that you can add. When I first was starting to create resumes for myself, I thought, I'm in HR, everything is qualitative, I only have words, what can I do here? And it wasn't until some coaching did I realize that I actually could add contribution values. I was working on a benefits program and I saved the company a lot of money. And so recognizing, oh yeah, you could actually, so looking at different things on how you can add value using numbers, you can actually articulate right in your resume. Couple more basic things in general. So if we're just looking at the resume in terms of formatting, is some really basic things is make sure that it's clear and consistent font. And so I did a fun thing and I just gave some examples of the font with the actual font. So Arial is the Arial font brand, etc. You can see. And so as a recruiter, I have no preference as long as I can read it. The font size should be between 10.5 and 12 point. A lot of people have a lot of things to say on a resume, and so they try and make it as small of a font as possible to fit in the margins, to fit onto a certain amount of pages. We know the tricks as a recruiter. And so as long as it's easy to read, now as I'm getting old, I've got to take my glasses off to read close up now. So, you know, making it at a proper font is very helpful. 1 to 2 pages max. Now I just have to put a caveat here because I've looked at, in doing research for this, so many of the sites that I looked up stated 1 page. I think that's virtually impossible, especially if you have 5 or more years of experience and you went to school, you have experience, you have a lot of qualifications. You need to be able to articulate that. However, no more than 2 pages, I would think, is entirely acceptable. I have to say, one moment. We were recruiting last year for a role, and I got a resume that was 5 pages. When I went to print it, it was 5 legal size pages. So that was pretty long. And it wasn't formatted correctly. And I would say it probably was written in the 80s. So best practices hadn't caught up to this particular individual. However, he was hired and he had a skill set that we needed. And so while I'm telling you all of these great best practices, sometimes I'm looking and zoning in on the skill set. I didn't necessarily need someone to create presentations or writing or documents. And so that was discarded at the moment. And I believe that some of those things can be taught as well. And so we were able to work with that. And then finally, I wanted to just mention visually appealing. And so really, I talked about margins a minute ago. So a lot of pages sometimes have the font all the way to the end so that there might be 2 or 3 millimeters of white space on either side. That's just too much. I know I'm going to have too much to read. It's if I see too much words, I'm going to have to move it away because I just don't have time. I've mastered the ability to be able to identify, and I do that ideally based on the best practices of the candidates that they have put into their resume. Okay. Oh, look at this. So for some reason, again, techie. So using PowerPoint, I wanted number 1 to slide in first, but looks like number 3 slid in. So I believe I've got 4 best practices on when to use a cover letter. And so we'll go through it. So I think I wanted to say the most obvious one is when it's asked for. And that's number 1. So obviously, if the job application requires it, then that's what you're doing. We'll talk about number 3 because it's there. If you're applying directly to a person and know their name. And it's not relevant to number 2, so it's okay that we can skip the 3. And so when you're doing that, and I'll talk about formatting a cover letter in a moment, but I just wanted to tell you when you're going to be able to use it. So obviously when they require it, if you know the person's name, that's really good. That's targeted. When I was looking to apply to GuardMe, I didn't know the name, and in fact they used a service, a recruiting service, and so I wasn't able to articulate directly to Marianne Brown and Keith Siegel at the time. If the employer, hiring manager, or recruiter requests it. So sometimes, and I do this because I really enjoy cover letters actually, in all my applications on the website, and right now we don't have any roles posted. However, I request a cover letter And I do that because I like, well, talk about it in a second, but it gives me a glance into the skill set that the candidate possesses. And then lastly, if someone has referred you to the position, that referrals we know are, so I say we know, I'm sorry, referrals are one of the best ways to get an opportunity for an interview. And so if you know to be able to put someone's name in there, it's like using LinkedIn, having connections, that's the best way to do it. And even if it's your hiring manager, although ideally that someone has given you that name as well. So not only do you know the name of the person, you're also going to refer that person's name in there. Hopefully that's going to give you an in. And actually we do that at GuardMe too. If I see that we have a referral from an employee, they're always going to go to the top of the pile in terms of my screening process. So what I wanted to say is 2% of job seekers get an interview from what I'm calling click and apply methods. And that's when you've got Indeed or another, job app on your phone, and it's already programmed into your profile, and you just see a job and you hit apply and apply and apply. I get hundreds of those. To me, I'm not quite sure it adds very much value. It doesn't tell me anything about that person. And I feel strongly that the job application shouldn't be taken lightly. And so ideally, and this is also a hint, is for me as a recruiter, I will always go and look at the resume and cover letters of folks who have included a cover letter, because in my job ad, I ask for one. And so I always look at those resumes first as well. Okay. So what is a cover letter going to look like? Actually, just before that, I had a poll I wanted to ask you. So I'm going to pull it up. I want to ask you if you have ever written a cover letter. So poll's open now. You could let me know if you've ever written a cover letter. Most of you, yes, that's excellent. So maybe you guys can teach me a few things then. Good, okay, super. So just to share, 89% of you have written one and 11% have not. So maybe you can let me know if this is sort of on point as to the type of experience that you've had. So a cover letter is important. About 26% of recruiters read them and consider them critical in their decision to hire. I'm one of those 26, absolutely. And our employers, another best practice is that 56% of employers actually prefer that applicants attach a cover letter as well. I attached one when I sent my application over, although it didn't require one. So this is what the ideal cover letter should look like. And I know I might be a little bit of an HR nerd here, but I like cover letters. And I think it's because I've been able to master writing them. But I have a trick and I want to share it with you. So back to the headers, you're going to put your name, your email, phone number. And I didn't mention this when I talked about resumes, but make sure you have your voicemail set up. I can also give you some experience of how many times I've tried calling the number, but I actually can't, I can't leave a message. And so even if I wanted to reach out to that person, I couldn't. And sometimes voicemail is, a phone call is much easier and quicker than an email. So make sure that voicemail set up. Obviously put the date. and include the company name and address of where you're applying. Include a salutation, so depending on who you're articulating the letter to, so dear Mr., dear Ms., doctor, and so if you know their name, then that's great, and then you can also include their job title. Sometimes it's dear hiring manager. I get that quite a bit, and that's fine as well. Indicate your interest of the specific role that you're applying for, and include the name of the reference if applicable. And that will also connect that person who you included in the salutation to be able to connect you and that person now. So that's already, oh, all right, I'm going to pay attention because I know so-and-so. Short sentence. So in each of these, I would say from indicate your interest, it was sort of small little paragraphs. So a sentence or two on what you can offer based on how many years experience. So I put X there to represent how many years experience you've had in that particular area. My favorite part of the cover letter is to be able to take the time to expand on your skill set as it relates to the specific job requirements listed in the posting. So this is where my nerd comes in, and what I do is I print out the job posting, and I know what my skills are. So I look at the three-part, I call it my three-part strategy. I look at the skill set on one side, I know what I have in my resume on the other, and then I take those skill set that they're asking for, A, B, and C, and I find A, B, and C on my resume and I match it. And so if you're looking for interpersonal skills, I can articulate that I have interpersonal skills, and I'll either use that exact wording so that they'll be like, oh yeah, I'm connecting, right? So they're connecting, and I will be able to expand on that. So I can demonstrate that I have interpersonal skills because I have 5 years of experience coaching students, or you know, in employer relations, that type of thing. What you want to do is be able to link it with the skill set and then provide an example, okay? And then if you are aware of what that particular company and or job is going to entail, you can also refer to a task or project that you would like to discuss further about, and that where you can add value, okay? And again, it's difficult because I feel like I would like to ask you if you have any questions at this point. Closing, suggest, and I would say you could be a bit forward in your closing and suggest a mutual time. So I would like to meet with you at a mutually convenient time for an interview. I just realized I'm checking my time, so I'm going to try and speed it up a little bit. And then, of course, always thank you for their consideration. So interview prep. So preparing for a job interview is not an easy feat. The first and foremost best practice is to make sure you've done your research. And while it's a best practice, there are so many people who don't do the research. I researched and spent hours trying to figure out GuardMe, and I found pictures of campus ambassadors and parties, and it was and videos. It was fascinating, but actually, as I started doing research, I started writing questions that during my interview I would like to pose those questions. Therefore, it indicated my interest, shows interest of the company. So you want to look at the background and history. If you have a desire to work in that company, obviously, if you can, do some research on the job you're applying for. A lot of people in the interview ask if it's a new role or not, and it's a very valid question to ask. So you can do that as well. And if possible, you can find a little bit about the background of the interviewer. When I first went to, I would say, the screening at the third party's company for GuardMe. I was super nervous. It was a law and HR law and employment consulting firm. So to me, this was the ultimate. If I didn't pass, like I don't even have a career in HR anymore. But I couldn't look at them up at all. I mean, it wasn't, I knew that if I didn't pass that, I wouldn't get into even GuardMe to see anybody. So I did a lot of research on Keith and Marianne when I went in front of them as well. Employers are going to be looking for people who will be with the company long term. And so being able to ask relevant questions about the background and history, and it shows their interest and your interest, and then it will articulate their interest in you, and it could generate a discussion rather than just a formal interview. Okay. What I'd like you to do is also review and anticipate questions. Always do this. There's so many websites that you can go on and review common questions. There's general questions, and then there's job specific questions. As a recruiter, I use Google to look up questions to ask the candidates. So go ahead, but the best thing to do is make sure you prepare and formulate responses to those questions. You don't want to memorize them, and you don't want to be able to blabber on, but as long as your responses are clear and concise, detailed, but whatever those questions are going to be, you want to be able to loop in your skill set and your experience within those questions. Dress for success. This is actually really, really important. So rule of thumb, dress appropriately for the role that you're applying for, and ideally dress 2 levels up. So we had an IT, so our IT company, our IT department, usually they're in jeans and a polo shirt, and they're okay to get their jeans a little bit dirty because sometimes they have to crawl on the ground and connect wires. And though we do have people who, when they were applying for the role, they would be wearing a suit and tie, and that's very impressive. And so dress appropriately. Ideally, avoid loud patterns and flashy colors. Business appropriate, so ideally no bare skin, no short shorts, but make sure you're also comfortable. You don't want to be uncomfortable, so make sure that your clothes fit comfortably. Ideally, no, not ideally, make sure your clothes are clean and pressed, that you have clean shoes, and the bag that you might be bringing with you, if it's a purse or a knapsack, that it's clean and tidy. And then, of course, maintain good hygiene and grooming. So have a shower before you get ready for your interview. Make sure your hair is groomed. You know, clean hands, nails, your deodorant's on. You're feeling comfortable. You're feeling great. And now you're almost there. So making sure you're there on time. Ideally, no more than 15 minutes. If you're there any sooner than that, as a recruiter, now I got to figure out what to do with you while you're waiting. And I do have some people who have come really early, and I feel awful because I just unfortunately cannot see them until their scheduled time. And though they are very gracious and are happy to wait, I just feel like while they're waiting, there's nothing that I can do and I'm wasting their time, and I don't like that. So ideally 15 minutes. But within that 15 minutes, it shows that you appreciate and respect their time. So you're demonstrating that. You're also demonstrating your interest in the role. Gives you a moment to look around. In our reception area, everybody is super friendly. And before I actually go out to meet somebody, they have probably met 3 or 4 people in the hallway, because it's also a gateway to the washrooms, the facilities, as well as the downstairs to the first floor. And then as well, if the recruiter and or hiring manager is running late, it also gives you some breathing room time and manage any changes. Okay, I want to leave room for questions. So the last part of this session that I wanted to take you through is the ideal skill set and what employers are looking for right now. And so maybe we can do this really quickly, just maybe in the chat, is you tell me if you guys know the difference between what a hard skill is and a soft skill. You can write it in the chat. Anybody know? All right. Either we're shy or we don't know yet, and that's fine. So a hard skill is skills that are acquired through deliberate effort. They're learned. So this is what you're learning in school right now. You're learning, I wrote languages as an example. So I unfortunately don't have a second language that I know. Started French and Spanish, and both of them were too difficult for me. I thought so at the time, so unfortunately. So that would be a second language that you have. Hard skills, coding. So I wrote HTML, Python. If you're a writer, copywriting, business and economics, I saw who are in those programs. So data analysis, any of those types of things. Those are hard learned skills through that effort. So a lot of the things that you're going through in university right now, or college, that's exactly what that is. Soft skills are tied to your personality traits. So leadership, communication, interpersonal skills, negotiating, and time management. So this is, I wanted to note that your soft skills are generally, because if we have 20 people who graduate from the same program and they all come out with 80s, they essentially know the, let's say it's a software program or software developer program. They all know HTML, they all know Python, they all know all of the applications. How am I going to choose which one is the best person? So it really is the soft skills that is going to make your application stand out, not only just in your cover letter, resume, and interview. It's going to give you the edge. Okay. And then the skill sets. So we talked about hard and soft skills. These are the actual skill sets I'm looking for, and I was happy to see that these are also best practices as well. So I think at this point, I had a couple chats I wanted to integrate into this, but just to be mindful of the time, we can just wrap it up through the questions. So the first one is listening skills. Verbal communication involves both speaking and listening. In a business organization, the key to effective working relationships among employees, the key is to have these listening skills. And so not many of you probably have children at this point. I'm making a huge assumption here, but I'm thinking of my own children, and they either hear me or they listen. They hear, but listening means they're actually going to do something about it. It impacts the interaction that you may have with clients, with others in your team, with your leadership. And when you're listening, and some of you may have learned this if you have been in any customer service roles, is that listening and then repeating what you've listened is very, very relevant. It shows that you're hearing them and you want to validate what they've heard. The next thing is being intuitive, which is the ability to problem solve. So I just wanted to state, so I pulled this particular quote out of the Harvard Business Review because I thought it was really relevant. I'm going to read this definition to you. I'm not always reading, but an intuitive thinker often reinvents the wheel each time he deals with a particular problem. However, the intuitive person is better able to approach ill-structured problems where the volume of data, the criteria for the solution, or the nature of the problem itself do not allow the use of any predetermined method. I hope that's as clear as it can be. What it really means is people continually keep the problem in mind, and they're always trying to think of a response, and it's changing all the time. Let's go to the next one, taking initiative. sorry. So initiative is the ability to be resourceful, essentially without being asked or told what to do. It requires you to be resilient and shows determination. I love this as a skill set. It's very difficult in the interview to be able to say, hey, demonstrate to me how you take initiative. And so I can ask the person, but until they start doing the work. And so being able to have examples for any of these skill sets is going to be ideal. Being articulate. Sometimes you're thinking, you're trying to say something. This is me earlier in my presentation. And I'm trying to be very clear and concise as I can. But in my head, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what am I saying? I'm completely messed up. And so it's like it's a 10-car pile up here. You know, it's all messed up and I can't think straight. And so we are constantly bombarded with social media, news outlets, social environments, and we're trying to take in a lot of information at once. What we want to be able to do is be able to articulate ourselves in written and spoken communication very well. Get to the point, be clear, be concise, but also try and make sure that whatever you're trying to articulate or communicate across is coming through effectively. And when you are putting together a resume or putting together or preparing a cover letter or even practicing an interview with a friend, you can have your friend play role play with the questions. And then it'll also be able to help you hone in on being more articulate. Okay, I see someone raise their hand. So if you have a question, maybe you can post it in the chat and we will take a look at that in a moment. Okay, teamwork is, I want to say a pretty obvious one, but not always. Teams don't work well without teamwork. You guys know that. I'm certain that you must have done teamwork in a lot of your studies. In order to be able to have a meaningful and lifelong career, you're going to need to be able to work well with teams. I think this is so critical, so I just wanted to articulate a couple points. Teamwork brings new ideas. Teamwork helps solve problems. Teamwork is very supportive. I just think of the campus ambassador team right now who's, cheering me on, even though my lack of techie skills is to be desired. Teamwork builds morale. There we go. All right. And my last but not least point is being organized. When employees are organized, it increases the productivity of the business. And so while it appears that if it's just you being organized, that carries through in multiple different areas. And I'll tell you why. It boosts productivity by saving you time. If you have paperwork on your desk and you're looking for something, or your manager has come and said, where's that proposal? And you're rifling through papers on the desk. If you don't know where it is, it's going to upset that person, and it's going to delay possibly the client who's waiting for something. You're going to eliminate stress. I would get stressed if I'm being asked for something and I don't have it right at that moment, which is me right now as I'm trying to scroll through my notes and see you, and you become actually more creative. And so we have a specific background on right now, but if I twirled my computer around and you could see what my office looked like right now, it is not organized. And I am in a home office, but it has been a space where we have added stuff over the years. And so I've been here for 3 months and I completely do not feel organized. And so I'm looking forward to not being a teacher through the summer with my kids and actually getting this space a little bit more organized so I can feel more productive and creative. So there's a couple other things, but I wanted to just say, you know, you'll meet your deadlines. You can locate things easily. And finally, you can make more money being organized. That really is, if you are trying to operate as efficiently as possible, if you are disorganized, your clients are going to see that, even if it's not your own business and your client is asking you something and you can't get that answer immediately, that they are not going to be happy with you and you're not going to be able to make that sale perhaps. So ideally, these are the skill sets that I would be looking at. And in an interview, I would be asking you to be able to demonstrate these things. I really won't know for sure if you can do any of these things unless you can demonstrate. And so what you want to do is be able to make sure you have examples for each of these particular skill sets and more, if you like, to be able to articulate that to the hiring manager. And on that note, this is my final slide, which is questions. And so I'm going to leave it back to our wonderful hosts, Campus Ambassador team. If you guys can help me out here in terms of managing the chat and or questions.
Of course.
Sure.
So as we're getting that organized, I'll just point out to everybody the QR code on the screen for the feedback for the session, and the code that you can see here is workplace. And Mayura will remind everybody as well at the end of today.
Mm-hmm. We have two questions here, one from Hassan and another one from Raisa.
Do you want to read them out for Kelly one by one, maybe?
Yeah, sure. From Hassan, he say, first, thank you very much, Kelly, for the great tips you mentioned. I have a question about soft skills. While many people believe these are not something that can be taught, what advice you give to people to improve these skills? And as a recruiter, do you weigh the importance of soft and hard skills equally or not?
Great questions.
Okay, question. While many people believe these are not something that can be taught, to improve these skills. That's fantastic questions, two-part questions. While many people believe they're not something that can be taught. So depending on the skill set that you're looking for, there's absolutely many different ways. So now I'm going to pull up my PowerPoint again. And so I can't view it. Let's see, bear with me a moment. I want to pull up these skills. So. Okay, so someone stopped sharing the screen, and that's fine, thank you, so I can talk to that. Okay, listening skills. So listening skills are really important. I'll use this as an example for sales people, is that when you're listening to a client or you want to try and find out what it is they need, you're posing a lot of questions to them, and then you're sitting back and you're listening. What you don't want to do is interrupt them while they're telling you what their challenges are or what they're looking for. And so I would say, in terms of trying to hone in on your listening skills, I could say you could practice with your friends, your family, and when you're having a conversation, just pause before you might actually think about speaking. Just take another, maybe count to 3. 1, 2, 3, and maybe that'll actually, they'll continue to talk. I guess it's a unique skill, but then the other thing that you can do to practice is go back and whatever they have said, repeat a couple things that they have said that you can actually relate to, depending on what that conversation is. If you can relate to them, I see a few of you nodding, so I'm able to articulate myself okay. And then the second part of that question, And as a
It's-
recruiter, do you weigh the importance of soft skills and hard skills equally? That's a really good one, because I absolutely, I'm thinking of a software developer role that we'll probably be hiring for soon. And if they don't have that skill set of that language, the particular software code, as much as of a great listener they are, or being able to take initiative, I need them also to have that ability to code. And so I would actually agree and say, yeah, I think I'm going to have to weigh those equally. And as I mentioned, it's our hard as a recruiter to articulate for sure all of those soft skills. And so we take that with a grain of salt and hope that between that and their hard skills, they'll be the ideal candidate.
Mm-hmm. The other question is from Raissa. What should we answer when the employer asks for my defaults, imperfection, or I think weakness?
It's funny. That used to be one of the best practice questions. So what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? That was on, when I started at GuardMe, that was on one of the sheets that says, hey, these are one of the questions. And so I would actually say that I probably asked those questions. So I wouldn't say that these are my defaults or imperfections. I would say, if they're actually use that language, or what are your weaknesses, you can indicate that there's a few things that, maybe there's one or two things that I've been working on. So my presentation skills, I have been working on my presentation skills. I find that I've been lacking. And so these are the things I'm working on. I've taken a course in PowerPoint or Zoom or Teams, and have worked with A, B, and C. And so if you can just demonstrate whatever default imperfections or weakness that you have to articulate what you have done to improve, that's how you answer. You turn it into an opportunity for growth and learning versus continuing it as a weakness.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think we answered all the questions actually. Is there anyone have any other question?
No, thank you so much. Thank you for listening and bearing with me as I managed through polls and chats.
No worries. Thank you, Kelly. It was very insightful, your presentation. And now we invite Negar, Campus Ambassadors Manager.